We had no idea how difficult it was going to be. And if we'd known, we probably wouldn't have done it.
Hi, I'm Lucy.
I'm Krish.
And this is Pack Chats, and today we are joined by a very special guest, Thomas Derricott-Yap. Thomas is the Community Manager for the Faculty of Arts, Design and Architecture, ADA, at UNSW Founders, and in your role you focus on helping students and alumni from creative backgrounds build the skills that they need to take their ideas to market. And Krish and I have actually been involved in one of your workshops, and it was incredible.
Oh, thank you so much.
But yeah, you're a strong advocate for the idea that creativity is a superpower in the startup world rather than a weakness. And you're also the co-author, alongside your wife, Wenny Derricott-Yap, of Writing the Unicorn, the Startup Guide You'll Want to Read, and that was published late last year. The book is a no-nonsense guide to the Australian startup ecosystem, covering the life cycle from side hustle to scaling. And shortly after its release, it became a #1 bestseller in categories like venture capital and business research and development. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
That's incredible. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So I had a kind of bit of a question when we were kind of researching you. Can you please talk about your cat cafe really quickly?
Absolutely. It's so strange. It happened over 10 years ago. So I'd reached that point where I stopped including it in my introduction if I was reaching out to someone. I didn't want to be like that high school jock who was talking about their sporting records from over a decade ago, and I thought I should probably just let it go. But then I had a few conversations with people who would say, oh, hey, I found out you launched a cat cafe. That's wild. And so I thought, this is a side quest that I should probably mention a bit more. So in short, we launched back in 2015, which is a lifetime ago. At the time, I think I had maybe 8 weeks of hospitality experience. I'd waited tables and cleaned floors during university over a summer break, and that was it. But my now wife and I had been working in content marketing at the time, and we had been running this content marketing campaign for a plasterboard, and it was 15% more durable than every other plasterboard on the market, and I just wanted to die of boredom.
Sounds thrilling.
Yeah, it was like mile-a-minute stuff. But then we took this holiday to Chiang Mai, and we visited a cat cafe when we were there, and we both just fell in love with the concept. And we just started talking, saying, wouldn't it be great if instead of running a content marketing campaign for a plasterboard, we were running it for a cat cafe? And then the idea started to germinate, and we thought, or we could open a cat cafe. And it was really an exercise in the benefits of naivete, because we had no idea how difficult it was going to be. And if we'd known, we probably wouldn't have done it. So it's a good thing we didn't know, because then we just did it. We essentially returned home. We created a Facebook page for the concept of the cat cafe. This was early 2015, so Facebook was like the platform du jour. It was before Instagram had really taken off. And then within 24 hours, we had a couple of thousand followers, and people started saying, hey, when is this cat cafe opening? And can I contribute via a crowdfunding campaign? So we thought, oh, wow, people want this. Let's create a crowdfunding campaign, I guess. And then as soon as we did, the media picked it up, and everyone started asking, when are you opening? We said, I don't know, February is now. So I guess we find a property, we lease it, we work with an animal rescue group, rehome some cats in July, I guess. And suddenly we raised $40,000 via this crowdfunding campaign.
Gosh.
So we thought, oh, geez, okay, this actually needs to happen now. So then we uncovered all of these unknown unknowns, like problems that we didn't even know existed before this process. When you lease a property, it's not just a case of finding the commercial property you want, signing a contract and moving in. You need to either find one that's been approved for your business, or you need to submit a development application. Or then there's like the private certification route, which is faster but narrower. And then you've got to get fire engineering approval. And then when you're working with animal rescue groups, you need to find groups that understand what you're doing and can help you create the right kind of environment for the cats, but also give you enough trust to ensure that you can execute your vision. And then there's the fact that council has no idea how to classify a cat cafe because at that time the business model didn't exist in Sydney. So we suddenly found ourselves navigating all of these different problems that we'd never even envisaged before. But we managed to open late July with about 5 days to spare. So
Wow.
we did actually make our deadline. It was a complete shambles when we first opened, but we both learned a lot from it. And I parted from Catmosphere in late 2017, and I'm thrilled to say that it still exists to this day, just around the corner from this studio, actually.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
We might have to take
should
a
drop by.
visit.
You totally
afterwards.
should.
That's so cool. So with all of these like admin sort of roadblocks that you encountered, was that just you and Wenny who was sort of like encountering them, or did you get other people on board?
Excellent question. So we did bring on board a couple of investors. It was nothing like what you'd find in the startup space where you go to big venture capital firms. It was individuals who had said, hey, this sounds cool. I'd like to invest some money. So they kind of acted like what we would now call thought partners. So we'd bounce ideas off them, but most of the time it was just me and Wenny. And it was probably the first introduction to this concept that we explore in Writing the Unicorn, which is this idea of being an endless novice, which is when you run any kind of business, side hustle, startup, anything, you're going to constantly encounter problems that require your attention as the founder. And you can't be an expert in all of them. But if you can give yourself a crash course and imperfectly learn the fundamentals of the skill set, then you can navigate the problem just well enough to move on to the next.
As a uni student, the whole topic of this podcast is where to begin. How do we actually start? What we want to start? Who do we talk to? What resource do we need? What legal and like admin stuff do we need to know about? And all of those kinds of things. But it's also now because of LLMs and because of all these AIs, it's easier than ever to also bring yourself up to speed. Like you said, to an extent where you can move past whatever task or challenge is like kind of impeding you in the moment. And then you also mentioned like your network. Do you find that, how important has networking been to you getting to where you are? And do you think, how should uni students leverage their network?
So I'll give two different answers there. In terms of where I am right now, networking has been crucial. In fact, the reason that we wrote Writing the Unicorn is because my wife and I, we looked at each other and we realized that between us, we knew a lot of successful founders. We'd both worked in startups, and my wife had gone to a selective school, which just meant by default, she knows a lot of annoying high achievers. And so we realized if we can take their insights and condense them into a simple step-by-step guide, we might have something of value. So I suppose, personally, I've always seen my value as being the people I know. I shudder to use that expression, your network is your net worth.
Yeah.
But I'm also aware that I'm not a genius, and it takes a lot to be the very best in a particular skill set. So the way I've seen it is that the people I know is like a force multiplier, not in terms of an old boys or an old girls network where I'll call somebody I went to school with, their dad will be sitting on the board or their mum will be the CEO of a company and they'll give me a job. But rather, I see it as an opportunity to be able to share knowledge with the people I know and care about and benefit hopefully from our respective insights. But in terms of students and the benefit of networking there's this philosophy that I don't want to say we created, but that we articulated, called network before you need to network. So to give you an example, let's say you're about to graduate and you know exactly the kind of career that you want to work in and you're hoping to have a job next month.
Yep.
If you start going along to industry events at that point and meeting the shot callers in that industry, every conversation is going to feel high stakes because you think a potential job is on the line here, which means that you're probably going to dread the event. If you're an introvert, it's going to feel 10 times worse. And you're probably going to sabotage yourself by bringing too much nervous energy to every exchange. But if you go to that same event before you need the job, let's say you're entering your final year of study. You know the kind of career you want to enter, but you're a year away from applying. You're networking before you need to network. You go to these events, people ask, oh, what brings you here? And you say, oh, I'm currently studying in this particular industry and I just want to understand more about it. Once these shot callers realize that you're not trying to pitch them something, you're not trying to sell them on a certain concept, they'll relax. In fact, in a lot of cases, they'll probably feel really encouraged that you're a young, proactive person who's educating themselves. This gives you the opportunity to maybe connect with them on LinkedIn or whatever the platform of choice might be. And then it means that if you can remain in contact with them digitally, a year later, you're in a position to say, hey, remember me? We've met at a few events. Well, I'm about to graduate and I'd love to see how I could best contribute to your organization. And by then, you're a known quantity to them and it all happened because you networked before you needed to.
Yeah, wow. If we could just circle back to Riding the Unicorn. From your observations, which aspect of your book has resonated most with students?
Ooh, that's a really good question. With students, we often find that there will be the occasional student who has had a clear vision of the kind of business they want to run since they were 15. But in most cases, students, especially at an undergrad level, they might know that they want to be entrepreneurs and they're still exploring the process and educating themselves on what to do next. And it's a perfect time to do that, right? I think the aspect that's probably resonated most with students is the idea that you don't need to be a specialist. So this is something that matters a lot to me. As you say, I work a lot with students from the Faculty of Art, Design and Architecture. So I am a huge advocate of creativity as an entrepreneurial skill. It's even more the case now because with AI, it's entirely possible to create technical solutions as a non-technical user, right? Using Claude Code, for example. But taking a step back, ignoring the tools, I think the thing that seems to resonate most with students is the idea of being a problem solver in chief. It's kind of related to the endless novice idea. The fact that if you start a business, you're always going to face more problems than you have hours in the day. And often, if you're a 19-year-old student and you're considering a future as an entrepreneur, that sounds really scary. But once you come to terms with that, you realize that your job as a business founder is actually just to triage problems. It doesn't need to be to work as a software engineer or to work as a financial analyst. Like we discussed before, a fundamental grasp of those kind of skills can be important. But really, your number one goal is to be able to determine which problem you need to focus on today. So there's this whole concept we explore called the pyramid of priorities. And in the book, it's just a simple pyramid, 3 levels to it. The top one is which problems could sink our business today or the end of this week. For example, oh gosh, we've just discovered that we've launched this business that is in violation of some important regulatory code, and the government is going to shut us down and fine us unless we address it today, right? Number one problem. Next level is which problems might sink us in the next 6 months. Like, okay, we've got X thousand dollars in our bank account, but we are burning through Y $1,000 each week, which means that if we don't either adjust our spending or find more money, we will be out of business within 6 months. That's not something that's going to ruin you tomorrow, but it does need to be a priority. Then you have those issues that might be a problem in the future, like how do we scale internationally? Or we're focusing on a niche target market, how do we expand to others? Or what kind of corporate structure are we going to create to ensure we can bring on future investors? And the problem with most entrepreneurs who fail, especially in the startup space, is not so much that they don't solve problems. It's that they solve the wrong problems. They succumb to what we call the specialist trap. So, for example, if you've graduated from law, you're probably going to be tempted to focus on all these legal problems. Now, if the current legal problem is regulatory breach, that's great. But if the legal problem you're focusing on is shareholder structure for Series B funding and you haven't even conducted pre-seed, that's probably an issue that can wait till next year. So being able to detach from the specialist trap and just objectively and agnostically triage your problems is one of the most important skills.
So it's more of like when you're starting off us as like side hustles and all of those, it's less about, like you said, knowing the technical things, knowing how to code, knowing how to do the legal stuff, more about one, problem solving and kind of like putting the pieces of the puzzle that you're envisioning together without necessarily needing to go into the specific processes behind it. So if it's like clothing you're talking to manufacturers, they're doing all the printing and logistics around that. You're just being like, hey, can I have this? When will I have it by? And you get it. And then you focus on kind of like piecing these different processes together.
Yes, but it depends with a side hustle on how you want it to manifest in your life. So the reason I say that is because some people will launch a side hustle because they eventually want to expand it into a huge business. And some people, a side hustle will be a way to make money doing something they love. So on the clothing example, let's say you have visions of creating a fashion brand. In fact, you know what? I'm going to use this opportunity to explore the difference between a side hustle, a small business, and a startup.
That was my next question
I was
as well.
thinking the conversation feels like it's leading there, so I'll just delve right in.
Yes, please.
So let's say you just love designing clothes. You love designing, you love making them. It's what you want to do. You might launch a side hustle as a clothing designer. Now, this could mean that you have your full-time job or even your full-time studies, and then in evenings and on weekends, you design clothes, you may hand make them yourself, and then you go to a market, for example, and you sell them directly to people. Or you might create an e-commerce platform and then sell them via Instagram or TikTok. Now, in this environment, most of your time is spent doing the thing that you love. You're not going to become a multi-millionaire from it, but that's okay. You just want to make money pursuing a passion. Let's say you want to launch a small business. A lot of times when people hear small business, they immediately think that's a laundromat that's owned by a couple of grandparents. But a lot of the biggest companies in the world started as small businesses. In that case, using this example, it may well be that you create a fashion label or maybe a fashion store. So let's say you start by selling your garments on the weekends, selling them via an online store. Demand reaches a point where you think, I can't keep up with this anymore. I need to start outsourcing some of the manufacturing to another country, go to a factory or something. At that point, you're not spending as much time anymore physically making the clothes. If you open a store, for example, where you sell your own clothes, then your vision might be, let's see if I can open a second and a third and a fourth. In that kind of scenario, you've taken a step away from your passion, but you're still ensuring that fashion and garments are at the forefront of what you do every day. You're physically walking into a clothing store, you're looking around at clothes that you've designed. Yeah, you need to spend some time on bookkeeping and liaising with stakeholders, but it's still clear that you're a fashion person. Let's say you want to launch a startup. In this instance, a startup might be if you create, let's say, an online platform that's AI powered to match different style templates with different tastes. So for example, you sit down, you put in a prompt like, I want to dress like Keanu Reeves in John Wick, fused with Charlie XCX. Yep. And then it gives you a mishmash of different templates that accommodate that very specific look. At that point, clothing is very quickly going to have very little to do with what you do every day. You're going to be looking at raising money. You're going to be looking at marketing, constant tech innovations to ensure that your platform is cutting edge, that you're offering a unique value proposition that no one else offers, you're going to be looking at reaching as many different people as possible. So you might have a day every now and then where you get to stop and look around and think, hey, look at this, I am on the cutting edge of fashion. But most of the time, fashion might feel incidental to your daily life. If that is you, it's probably not because you love making clothes yourselves. It's because you wanted to solve a problem.
And so with these 3 different types of businesses, I guess, startups, small businesses, and side hustles, does the concept of both scaling and marketing differ between the 3 of them?
Yes. Yes, it does in a very important way. So we can heap the small business and side hustle into one category for this example. So let's talk about marketing for the small business example we used. You've opened a clothing store, right? Bricks and mortar. You've leased a location. You're competing with other clothing stores. It's a competitive market, right? But let's say you've done well. You've invested money into marketing. People have come into your store. You've made enough profit that you can justify a second store, and then a third, and then a fourth. Your business is doing really well, but you're not scaling, because scaling is when you can grow your revenue without commensurately growing your costs. So in this example, your costs are growing each time you open a new store. Like, yes, you may be making money from 4 stores, but you're also paying for 4 stores. You're paying for 4 lots of employees. You're paying for the garments that are going to be stocked in those 4 stores. So it might be great for you because at the end of the day, you're making more money, but it also means that if the business starts suffering, your costs don't reduce. You still got to pay for those 4 stores unless you close one of them. Whereas let's look at the startup example. If you've created this platform, this AI platform, there may have been overhead costs to get it started. But once it's there, you could theoretically reach a limitless number of people. Yes, as the business grows, you may invest more and more into marketing. You may invest more into further refining the platform. But if you stopped spending that amount of money, you could still keep the same number of customers, like let's say 10 million customers, whilst still running the same bare bones website that you created.
One really interesting concept I took away from the last time you met was the 70-30 kind of ratio that you mentioned. Can you talk about that really quickly?
Yes. So I will add it with the caveat that it doesn't need to be 70-30. Everyone has different conclusions. Some say 80-20, but the give-take split is what we'll call it. And it's this idea that when you generate content as a business owner, you want to ensure that 70 to 80% of the content is a give. That means that you are providing something to your followers or your readers or your listeners without asking for anything in return. So using your fashion example again, Krish, I know you were saying that you're interested in fashion and garments as a way to promote men's mental health awareness. So that might mean that 70% of your content cycles through those kind of themes. You know, you might offer fashion tips. You might share some tips for men's mental health. You might...
The brand image, basically.
Yeah, absolutely right. So that people become aware that you're all about fashionable clothes, but also men's mental health. And you'll get people following you based on that content because those things matter to them.
Yep.
And in the remainder of the time, 20 to 30%, if you have a sell like, hey, check out our new winter line, use this code for 30% off, people will think, yeah, okay, fair enough. I'm following this because I find value from the content. I understand this is a business, not a charity. So it makes sense that Krish and his business are going to be promoting something at least occasionally. Yeah. And the same principle can apply across any kind of channels, not just social media. So you'll often find it on company newsletters where really sophisticated companies, those big multi-billion-dollar ones, they'll have really segmented communication. So they might target somebody, for example, who reached the checkout on their website and then decided not to make a purchase. And so they'll send really granular messaging. But for students who are starting out, they've got like a small database, maybe a few hundred, you can just apply the exact same formula in your weekly email. So you might share 70% material that's providing some kind of value. So you've given people a reason to open the email. Then you finish with some kind of promotion. Worst case scenario, people think, okay, this was the price of admission looking at this ad. Best case scenario, you've converted people because the promotion obviously relates to the reason that they opened the email in the first place.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that it could go beyond social media also in terms of like emails and those sorts of, I guess, platforms where you can leverage engagement.
And podcasts for that matter as well.
Yeah, visually in
absolutely.
podcasts.
So how would you define creativity in business? Is it adjacent to artistry or is there something more there?
I think there's probably two answers to that question. There are those creative businesses that exist where your business is built around a creative hard skill, design, architecture, etc. But then there's creativity as a lens to perceive the world and to perceive problems and solutions. And that's, I think, what interests me the most, because I feel like creative students have a leg up in that respect, but I also feel like creativity as a means of perception is something that can be possessed by anyone, regardless of what you study. It's something that you can nurture. And I think we're at a turning point now where entrepreneurs will benefit more and more from trying to perceive the world through a kaleidoscopic lens. You know those old school kaleidoscopes? You turn it, the vision changes. I think entrepreneurs are now benefiting from being able to do that to their surrounding environments. You might look at your peers and think, okay, so I see a group of people who are going to be looking for jobs in 3 to 4 years, or I see a group of people who are going to be navigating a different housing market or navigating a different familial market, which is they may be changing the definition of what a family is. Being able to look at the world around you and see it through as many different scopes as possible will reveal opportunities to you. Because you might cycle through different ideas, think, nope, none of those interest me. But then if you can find an idea that aligns with your passion to an extent where you think you could stick with that problem for years, then you have a winner.
How much does it matter then to follow a rule book of sorts versus trusting your gut, taking a risk, and just kind of seeing where something goes? And that kind of ties back into the consistency part of like, do you hold on to that consistency when everything else kind of seems to be like, I don't know what to do, or it feels uncertain?
That's a really good question. And I think the most important aspect of any kind of rule book is establishing your own. By which I mean, what are non-negotiables for you as a founder? What level of risk are you willing to accept? What level of stress are you willing to accept? How far are you willing to skate close to disaster? Because everyone has a different risk profile, right? It's like if ever you've invested, some people park their money in index funds that just track 500 companies. Others, they're all about trying to make quick movements on crypto. And that's only going to work or not work for you depending on your risk profile. It's exactly the same if you want to be an entrepreneur. So I think to begin with, look at existing rule books. Look at what other entrepreneurs have done. It's the easiest way to establish a baseline. It's almost worth finding role models or entrepreneurs you identify with and determining how they've done what they've done. And it's part of the reason we wanted to write Riding the Unicorn, because we wanted to be able to showcase local entrepreneurs who had succeeded in Australia. It's like the idea, you can't be what you can't see. We wanted to do the same thing with local entrepreneurs. Once you've found examples that work for you, you can then kind of pick and choose, like, what about entrepreneur A's journey aligns with me and what doesn't? What can I maybe learn from entrepreneur B? How about entrepreneur C? And from there, you can kind of compile a rule book for yourself interspersed with your own values. Because there will be so many variables that hit you as a founder. not just in terms of challenges, but also in terms of potential compromises. As your business grows, you might need to make commercial decisions that you previously didn't want to. If you accepted investment from VC funds, they may want to steer you in a way you're not comfortable with. I feel a really pertinent example has been Duolingo. Have either of you two used Duolingo before?
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah, me too. I'm a diehard user. Duolingo launched with the really noble goal of making education accessible to everyone. They wanted to be the most used education platform on the planet. I don't know if either of you have noticed that the free version is becoming more and more limited. I'm on a subscription, and even then they're constantly trying to upsell me. It's because the founders faced increasing pressure from their investors, like monetize every single user you possibly can. And so they have deviated away from their original vision. This is not me trying to throw shade at Duolingo. I do not need to face the pressures that those founders did. But it's an example of how you're probably going to be required to compromise. So having a rule book on what risk you'll accept, what kind of lifestyle is the bare minimum that you will accept, how committed you are to your vision and the kinds of compromises that you will and won't make. These are all really important from the outset because they can be like your guiding light as you grow from that early exploration phase to something that might become a core part of your life.
Critically informed and critically thinking about kind of what you want to create out of
Exactly, yes.
Have you ever had to bail from a business because the risks surpassed what you were willing to accept in your rule book?
Very catastrophically. In fact, it was probably a case where I should have bailed earlier, but didn't. Long story short, after Catmosphere, I uttered those several words that so many men in their late 20s utter to themselves, which is, oh my gosh, I should open a bar. And because I'd had success with the Cat Cafe, I thought, this is just another hospitality business. Like the models are pretty interchangeable, right? But they were not at all. The nature of Catmosphere meant that we would generate revenue from bookings, people who had booked in to see the cats. And so it was still very much a small business, but there was a scalable component in the way that there wasn't quite as much with a bar. You know, if you have 10 booked out sessions, you're still paying the same amount to run the Cat Cafe. Whereas when you run a bar and you have a restaurant attached, there are so many variable expenses. In short, I was completely unprepared for the bar and restaurant business model. I took on some personal debts to keep it afloat, which was probably the point when I should have bailed. And then in the end, it went out of business anyway. And then I was left saddled with personal debts. So I went into that business, I think, distracted by shiny baubles instead of thinking to myself, what is it I want to achieve? What is my exit strategy? What are my non-negotiables in terms of my business principles and also my personal life? And what is the alarm bell that I need to listen to know when I should quit?
On the concept of like money and just all of those kind of stuff, we can't avoid that. We can talk business strategy and all of that, but at the end of the day, you need capital, you need money to kind of start something, whether it's a side hustle, startup, whatever. From your experience talking to other students and writing the unicorn, all of those kind of things, as students, how should we approach financially starting a side hustle? Is there a certain amount of money that we should have? When we do have that money, should we use it all at once? Should we space it out? Like what works for what strategy for what business?
I'm tempted to say something like, oh, there's no universal answer.
Yeah.
But I feel with this, my personal view is I want to take a stand and say students especially should go as long as possible without spending money. Because unless you have the good fortune to come from a very wealthy family that will back you, money is at an all-time premium when you're a student. And you don't want to start your career on the back foot. So to that end, I would suggest focus on building your business concept and then you can justify any expenditure. So For example, you can start with something as simple as creating a Google form or a poll on Instagram to test your concept with users. So with the fashion example, it might be, hey, what do you think of designs A, B, or C? Which is your favorite? Then once you have that information, it may be, how much would you pay? Like, would you consider this to be the right amount? Does it feel like it's too much for you? And then it might be, if this was released next week, would you buy it? And you've kind of got people invested in your journey at that point. It's never a guarantee of a sale, but at the same time, it means that if you spend money manufacturing those first 30 garments or something, then you're not just throwing clothes out into the ether and hoping that someone will pay for them. Even if you've launched like some sort of technical solution, like if we're not talking about a physical product, then I'd keep it in the moneyless stage for as long as possible, because it is viable to start courting investment on the basis of a concept. So if you've gathered a lot of support for your idea, then it's possible to go to angel investors who are like individuals that believe in different businesses and say, hey, look at all the hype I've attracted around this idea. The issue I'm facing at the moment is I need $10,000 to bring it to life. And if you join on the ground floor, then you can secure equity at this really early stage. Of course, a lot of investors are not going to be interested until they see that you've spent some money and you have some customers. But even then, by keeping your expenditure as low as possible, you can then build a business case around what you're doing. And then when you start courting investment, you can say, this is what I've done without your investment. Look at all these people who are using my product or have expressed interest in it. Imagine what I could do if you back me. Or, best case scenario, if you build in public without taking money from anyone else, and if you only spend your own money once you've proven the concept, you could create a self-sustaining business.
So I guess that leads us to our final two questions. If you were a student now, what side hustle / small business / startup would you create?
I honestly think that my answer to that probably would be the same 10 years ago, which is the one you think you can stick with. In fact, I'll give 3 different answers. For a side hustle, the thing that you enjoy doing. That's the point of a side hustle. If you're not going to evolve it into something else, then find something you enjoy doing that you don't currently get paid for and do that. Whether it's pet sitting because you want to spend time with dogs, whether it's designing clothes because you want a creative outlet, whether it's painting portraits and selling them at a market. For a small business, I would say choose the thing that you want to define your life, but also cross-section it against some fundamental research into the market. For example, if you really want to be an art gallery curator, it's probably worth conducting some research as objectively as possible into the demands for art from art gallery, into the current state of the digital art gallery landscape. How many people are buying artworks online now? Into the process required to establish the referral relationships that art galleries require to land those big fish customers. Because I think with small businesses, it's so easy, and I speak very much from personal experience, to put your blinders on and just think about the thing that you want to do. So yes, it's very important to be able to find an idea that excites you enough that you want it to be the core theme of your life, but you also probably need to be a bit objective in assessing the demand, in assessing the best case scenario returns, and assessing how likely it is for you to reach those. And if the picture looks grim, that doesn't mean discard the idea. It just means try and navigate your way towards a successful model. So, for example, using the art gallery case study, could you begin with a series of pop-ups, for instance? And then once you develop a following, maybe secure a permanent location. when you've built in loyal customers. And the great thing is, on that point, in the past, we kind of depended on friends and family to give us those sort of objective truths. And that could be really awkward because A, our friends and family are never objective, right? They're either too supportive or too critical because they know and love us. And B, it can often compromise the relationship. You sit down with someone and you say, okay, tell me honestly what you think about this idea. Please don't hold anything back. They listen to it and they think, okay, I'm going to be honest, I don't think you're going to make any money from that. I'm an accountant. I see thousands of businesses a year and this one's not going to be successful. You turn around, you don't know me. You don't know my business. You don't know what you're talking about. And then you go ahead and do it anyway with one less friendship. But now AI can act as a great thought partner. Of course, as we've probably all seen, AI can have optimism bias, right? Like, wow, amazing idea. You're going to change the world. But then once it's given us that answer and you say, okay, I would like you to act as a really harsh critic now, act as a business coach who is trying to tell me as directly as possible all the flaws with this idea, what could go wrong, it'll turn into a completely different large language model, right? And it's great because we can't hate a machine. But then for the third question about startups, this is probably the shortest answer, which is find a problem that you care about that no one else is solving. If you can do that, everything else is details. So many startup founders specifically, they fall in love with the myth of being a startup founder. And so they try and latch on to the trend of the day. You know, several years ago it was software as a service, business to business. 10 years ago, it was any kind of app. At the moment, it's AI-powered blank. But often, these are people who haven't really considered a problem at all. They've just considered the lifestyle they want to live. It's like we all knew that person in high school who wanted to be a rock star. And you think, oh, I wanted to be a pop star or a DJ. And you think, if the reason you're doing this is because you idolize the lifestyle or because you want to be famous, you are definitely not going to succeed. It's the kid who spends 12 hours a day sitting in front of their computer producing new beats, or they lock themselves in their room playing guitar over and over again. It's the ones who obsess about it who are going to make it. And it's the same with a startup. If you can find a problem that no one else is solving that needs to be solved, then everything that follows are details. Just go where the details take you. Acknowledge that you're going to face problems and try and address those problems as objectively as possible, and good things will happen.
Wow.
Right. Thomas, it's been amazing having you, very insightful. I'm honestly going to go back and listen to this myself at the end because there's just so many little bits and pieces that are incredibly helpful. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience. I know I tend to ramble.
One final
it was
question.
Perfect.
In 10 words or less, what is your dream?
My dream.
Your dream.
For creative people to realize they can conquer the world.
Yes,
Yeah, amazing.
that's
Love that.
perfect. Well, thank you so much, Thomas. We
Thank
really
you
do
so much.
appreciate it. Your insights have been incredible, and students all across Australia and possibly beyond as well are going to benefit from it. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. And I've got to do it. Riding the unicorn. Check it out. Hey.